It's Solidarity Wednesday. You know that means Benjamin Dixon's joining us. We're talking about how to support communities, allies, how to be good allies. You know the jam. Ben, you know, this is an election year, and
Yes.
it's an election year after redistricting, so a lot of folks are getting a late start and figuring things out. Donations are harder to come by right now. It's hard to raise money online. People are tired, but some people have plans to get folks excited and focused on solutions. And our next two guests are partnering up to help candidates out there focus and have a vision to solve some of our worst problems. We have the one and only Harvey Kaye. He's a professor emeritus at Wisconsin Green Bay, University of Wisconsin Green Bay, Emeritus of Democracy. I've said this a million times. He's the author of Thomas Paine and the Promise of America, Fight for Four Freedoms, Take Hold of Our History, and FDR and Democracy. And Alan Minsky, who is the one and only executive director of the Progressive Democrats of America. They have this plan. Oh, look at that. That's allyship. I don't have any. I have other people's books around me. I can't even. They're in Spanish. I have the San Juan Star in front of me.
Oh,
guys,
there it is.
if I'm in a hostage situation today, you know that it's today. Okay. All right. So this economic bill of rights. Los historiadores marxistas.
Oh, wow.
Británicos. I can't read the rest because I'm too blind. That's Harvey Kaye's book in Spanish. British history of British Marxism. Is that right? Did I get it right?
It's about the British Marxist historians.
Historians, yes.
I was looking for the Japanese copy. I couldn't find it.
David goes showing off. Who's showing off? We're all showing off.
I'm just having a good time because it's great to see you and Ben.
Hey, it's good to see you both, all of you. Yeah.
So, all right, let's just start off with why are you doing this? Why don't we need an economic bill of rights? Why are we going to folks running for office to do so? Alan, this is smart. You've already got a system for us. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the public opinion polling in the United States of America you can take a really long stretch of time, say the past half century, and you're to add up what issues are at the top line and the leading issues of the day, I believe the economy would be lapping everything. Obviously, we have periods where foreign policy is more significant or sometimes a subcomponent, and it's really of the economy, because let's face it, healthcare in America is both about lack of quality healthcare and also about cost. So that's definitely related to the economy when that does peak up. Close to the economy is a leading issue. But right now, there are three competing, and this season, there are two competing factions within the Democratic Party. It's very explicit and everybody knows it. We have these very clear races between very progressive candidates challenging very conservative incumbents. We even have coming up in Michigan's, on August 2nd, in Michigan's 11th district, Andy Levin versus Haley Stevens, two incumbents who are now drawn together, going head to head, one from the right wing of the Democratic Party, one from the left. Following the two successive Sanders campaigns, we clearly have, and everybody in the country knows it, a progressive formation that really stands for something different inside the Democratic Party. But right now in the messaging, especially that enemies of the progressives are putting forward to try to sort of characterize or caricature progressives, the fact that, I mean, you look at the work that was done by the squad, by the really solid progressive members of the Progressive Caucus over the past year, right, since we've had the 217th Congress. And over again, the issues they're hitting on are strengthening Build Back Better in terms of its economic components. The economic redistributive, meaning back towards a just economy or a more just economy within the United States, is really the central focus of the work done on Capitol Hill by the Progressive Caucus. Of course, there's climate components, there's certainly racial justice components that are very strong. And we in no way want to distance ourselves from those. We fully, absolutely endorse. They're absolutely essential. But we have to make clear that the economic message is heard. And when you see public opinion right now, we certainly have tremendous economic turbulence in many respects right now, from obviously inflation, but also because of the COVID pandemic. We've had a number of progressive initiatives that have actually been delivered to the people. They've proven very popular. Now we see people backtracking on them. Mm-hmm. And then we have what's very, very interesting sort of recalibration sort of in the soul of the country about just the grand relationship we have to our jobs that's going on in the United States of America. And so it really seems like an hour where it'd be beneficial for progressives to lift up and highlight, along with all of the other priorities, not diminishing any of them, but to recognize that the economic argument is a very strong argument, very, very strong argument for the progressives, and it's not right now being heard. And just to finish before we go to Professor Kaye, and I've spoken enough because Professor Kaye's wisdom supersedes mine for sure. Part of the inspiration for this was, of course, Harvey's work on this over the years, but also a really, I thought, tremendously obnoxious new rule from Bill Maher, where he clearly was defining the progressive left in a caricatured way that just dismissed what is so appealing to people about the progressive movement, completely leaving out the economic component. So this is why we brought this forward now.
It's interesting you say that, and because I immediately think of the New Deal, but there was a reaction by neoliberals, neocons, whoever, the conservative forces, that's Harvey's area, to the New Deal. But simultaneously, you had many people who saw the holes in the New Deal, where, ironically, as much as Bill Maher likes to say, we're all focused on being woke or whatever his deal is, it's actually, that's been missing. And I think what's fascinating about this is it's not, it seems like it's building upon what was presented, so long ago. Am I getting that right, Harvey?
Sorry.
No, go ahead. I mean, because many people say, "Oh, the New Deal was racist." I'm going to summarize it pretty blankly.
Yeah, well, the New Deal initiatives were not racist. The New Deal initiatives to get them through the Congress folks were carved out of the New Deal by Southern Democrats, the white supremacist Southern Democrats. But the thing is, so we've had 80 years to mature, right? And the thing to consider is this: the Democratic Party in 1960 actually had a platform that was based upon the Economic Bill of Rights of FDR in 1944. In the same year that the Republicans and Democrats alike began to seriously acknowledge, in light of the struggles taking place, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and others down south realized that it was imperative to bring an end, at least in the South, to apartheid, segregation, white supremacy. And it's interesting to note that the Democratic Party in 1960 had a platform that literally laid out the Economic Bill of Rights and all of the things Democrats would pursue to realize that. And that in the course of the 1960s themselves, you had A. Philip Randolph proposing a freedom budget in 1965 that really was standing on the shoulders of Lyndon Johnson's own call for great society and FDR's Economic Bill of Rights. And he laid out a plan. And as long as we're on video, he laid out a plan that. What
does the plan say for the audio, folks? There's podcasts too. Just tell us what the plan says.
Okay. A freedom budget for all Americans, budgeting our resources to achieve freedom from want. The plan was between 1966 and 1975 to spend the kinds of monies, which at the time were estimated at about $20 billion a year, to literally rebuild cities, redevelop the rural areas of America, bring an end to poverty in the United States. And this was endorsed by 150 plus academics, labor leaders, civil rights leaders, foundation leaders, and progressive politicians. And of course, the tragedy was that Lyndon Johnson, who was at that time embracing the idea of a great society, a war on poverty, and also was planning, and they actually did hold it, though it did not take place as it should have. It took place in the White House, a conference to honor A. Philip Randolph. And then in the wake of that is where the war in Vietnam is draining resources. And in 1968, Martin Luther King Jr., who in the early 60s had called for a minority Bill of Rights, now proposed truly embracing the concept of an economic Bill of Rights for all Americans, just that kind of thing, and called for it, I believe, in the pages of Look magazine, and it later also, I believe, it was in the Guardian newspaper, and is readily available there if anyone wants to look for it. The thing is that, yes, the New Deal was inadequate in a whole variety of ways, and but the point is we have 80 years to learn based on the struggles of the 50s, the 60s, and the struggles we've seen these past several years to address the needs of working people in all their diversity and to make sure that no one, based on any kind of criteria, would be left out of the rights that all Americans deserve for economic security, for democracy, and for the making of a more prosperous America.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. Good afternoon again. I hear in your voice, Professor Kaye, the fact that we have had enough time to not only solve any problems that may have existed with the previous plans, but we've also had plenty of time to understand the very nature of the problem. Could you just talk about why it would be that why would it be that we have the solution right in front of us, but the powerful would rather go in the opposite direction of exploiting us to our last penny, when we actually could do better if we tried something other than abject exploitation?
Well, so consider the fact that in the 1970s, capital and the right, eventually joined by neoliberal Democrats, essentially, and Alan may or may not subscribe to this particular argument, essentially declared war on working people. Not only working people, but especially on the rights of women, and all the more so in reaction to the Voting Rights Act of the 1960s, a war on the rights of people of color, which actually ended up a war on voting rights that was possibly excluding in many a state students, not only African-American, but white students, the elderly, regardless of their race or ethnicity. I mean, we have seen 45 years of war on the democratic achievements of the 1930s through the 1960s. And it's in those years of the 1970s where this war is declared. And moreover, the leading folks in the Democratic Party, led before Reagan even came there by Jimmy Carter and centrist Democrats, declared war by way of saying we need austerity in America. We have to liberate capital. And the conservatives found this as an opportunity to go after those folks who had benefited the most from the changes of the 1960s. Now, this is the interesting thing. This is why your question is so good. Right through the 1970s and the 1980s, the kinds of things that Roosevelt and the progressive Democrats in the 70s had pursued, most Americans, all the surveys showed, most Americans still wanted, whether it had to do with civil rights or economic security. They wanted it. And so what we're talking about here is not simply the Democrats forgot who they were. They were active Democrats who truly wanted to end the democratic achievements of the 30s through the 60s. And by the way, Jimmy Carter's family was an anti-FDR family, and Jimmy Carter himself had no affection for Franklin Roosevelt. And then the problem on top of that is, while the Democrats are in disarray, progressives and corporate Democrats and the diverse social movements of the 60s were competing with each other in the 70s, capital got it together.
Yeah.
They got it together. I've talked about this many a time I think I've talked about it many a time on your show too, Ben, but I know I've talked about it many a time on Nomiki's show. So the fact is that this Economic Bill of Rights, what's fascinating to me is that as Alan and I developed this, we know for a fact that most Americans want this, and they've wanted this since 1944.
Right before this segment, we had Representative Shannon on from Georgia, and we were talking about the repressive laws to go after voters, particularly from Black and brown communities across this country. And she's, Ben's in Georgia right now. And what I find so fascinating, what you just said, is there's an opportunity right now for Biden. I mean, if I'm going to be if I'm going to play like the centrist game a little bit, he could easily put in one win and say, see, and keep the people divided the way that I truly believe neoliberals have worked for 45 years. Keep them divided. You keep folks thinking that it's not about the economy, it's about fighting with each other. But instead of saying, okay, I do want to pursue expanding voting rights and fixing a lot of these laws, and or go after an economic bill of rights, he's doing nothing. And I feel like that's actually creating a scenario in which people are going to unify around all of these issues and see that the common enemy is the strategy of the last 50 years, 45 years since Carter. I mean, I'll start with Ben, because you're there. Like, what do you feel? Do you feel like folks are not feeling pitted against each other in the same way they used to?
Well, actually, I feel like that connection. I was hearing as Professor Kaye was talking about the backlash of some of these policies impacting more than just the intended target. I was thinking about Representative Shannon also with regard to the voting rights being violated and how that is being impacted on more than just communities of color or more than just Democrats in this case. The impact of this generation of unbridled, I don't care, like we could just catch it all, the powerful, right? We could, however we break it down, I think that there is a consensus, Nomiki, and everyone. I think there's a consensus amongst those people who have power, which is not only to divide and conquer, but is such a commitment to an ideology that I think at this point, Nomiki, if I could come back to what you're saying, I feel like they're not even playing their best politics for their own strategy, right? Because they're so committed to some antiquated beliefs about capitalism. It's like they're at a crossroads. Established Democrats don't know how to proceed because the best way to proceed is something along the lines of the Economic Bill of Rights.
So Alan, you run PDA and you work with a lot of candidates, and you have been for many, many years all over the country. When folks sign on, is this like a Medicare for all thing? Oh, yeah, Medicare for all. Many people signed on. Many believe, in Medicare for all and will fight for it. But there are also a lot of folks who signed on because it was popular and helped get them elected. But if it actually came time to vote on Medicare for all, maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they wouldn't support, or maybe if they're running for president, they'd pull away, or some other Senate or something else. How do you see this playing out when folks get elected?
Well, it is the final question on our questionnaire. Look, it's really are we actually proposing to proceed with a constitutional amendment to produce 10 new entries on the U.S. Constitution? That requires 3/4 of state assemblies across the country to pass it. No, we're not proposing that is the thing in front of us. What we are trying to build is we're trying to anchor this economic program as definitional for people who are saying they're running as progressives. Look, I really do think that there are essentially 3 parties inside our 2-party system right now. Now, there's some gray area there. We saw a lot of moderate Democrats vote more progressively on Build Back Better through Biden's lead. We should not have any illusions. This was happening in the crisis around the pandemic, right? They've done the relief act, so what can they do to keep the economy boosted during this time of crisis? And clearly the pandemic, going back to the CARES Act, led to a disregard for budget deficits and providing for the general population some welfare that was otherwise way off the table ideologically. So it happened in that context. But it also maybe showed to some of the more moderate Democrats the appeal of some of these progressive politics. I don't doubt for a second that most of them will double back towards being neoliberal Democrats. So we have a battle inside the Democratic Party, and we want to anchor a commitment to these economic policies because neoliberalism has failed the American public, the vast majority of the American public. If you think of politics as what we decide to do with the surplus that our society generates, we basically have a system that we're living in now that designates all of that surplus to the investor class to make them richer. And the rest of us keep going at best at the sort of evil level, just barely keeping our heads above water as we in our work generate the surplus. That's right. Lousy, lousy, lousy social system. In so many ways, there are so many signifiers that we basically have a failing social system in the United States. I mean, we have a mass incarceration system that keeps a steady 2 million people in prison. That's a signifier of a failed social system. The homeless population, the levels of depression, on and on down the line. We need a different social contract, and an anchor for that has to be an economic, essentially, Bill of Rights, an economic agreement, an economic accord, a different social contract. So that's what we're trying to establish and achieve. We know that 60 to 70 members of the House are firmly with this right now. We want to get that up to the majority of House members. And by the way, we know there's sort of progressives in name only inside the Progressive Caucus too. But
with pressure,
Yeah, with pressure, exactly. Sure. And in the short term, we're going to have to try to persuade some people who aren't initially on our team to support these policies, hopefully to get to where this is the majority tendency and it takes over the Democratic Party. Because for all sorts of reasons I don't want to get into, and we all can debate about, the petri dish of American politics for political science just shows that we end up with a two-party system as a default within the society. We can analyze why that is to death, but it just seems to be the case. It is consistently the case, and it will almost undoubtedly remain so in the near future. And to achieve the social changes we need and desperately need in our society, not only because of the extant real human rights atrocities that exist within the domestic United States of America, right? But also because of the climate emergency. We need change, and we need change fast. We need the population to buy into our political team that wants to see benign social in our society and in the world. And by the way, democracy is in danger in this country. And oligarchy and democracy are like oil and water. They don't mix. And right now, with the balance of power where it's held in our society, it's going to be a struggle. And that goes to this question that Benjamin raised, which is so deep, about why you have the resistance, the complete resistance of most of the establishment to these changes. It's sometimes soft resistance, sometimes hard. Well, they're benefiting from the current system. And they're probably insecure about how they would continue to benefit in any other system. Even if this isn't a direct attack on oligarchs and their wealth, such that it just eliminates it, right? At most, what we have on the table is higher taxation rates, and they'll be disgustingly wealthy at 2/3 of the level that they currently are. It's insane. But we need a new social contract. Go ahead.
I have to say that I think about this as the only way to save the Democratic Party, which is the only way to save American democratic life, is to enhance it. And progressives who are running right now are not running like from a hole. They're running from a real momentum that we've seen 2015-16, 2020. There is that group known as the Squad. Their numbers have increased. We can increase them now. The point is the Progressive Caucus needs to feel their energy in the heat, especially of the young folks who must make demands on the caucus to make demands on the legislative caucus as a whole inside of the House and indeed also in the Senate. But the main thing is this. When we see
Harvey, 1 second, real quick. I'm sorry if you're not seeing the chat. I just want to give final. Ben has to run, but let's.
Sure.
No, it's okay. I just wanted. If you have final thoughts, Ben, I know you have to chime in.
No, not at all. Nomiki, you're so responsive. I thank you for being such a responsive host. I was give you a few minutes warning, but listen, I really am excited to continue this specific conversation on our show. I know we're setting it up, I believe, for the later on this week. So
Friday morning,
gentlemen,
very early.
Friday morning. I am excited about it. And Nomiki, is always a pleasure spending time with you.
Super grateful. Thank you so much. Professor, I know you were on a roll, but while you're on that roll, do you mind throwing in what's actually in this Economic Bill of Rights?
Okay, well, the one that's in the original article, we've enhanced. Okay, we've enhanced. So I'll go through them, but since I know we've only got, 5-10 minutes at the very most, let me go through them. First, the right to a useful job that pays a living wage. And if I think Alan and I agree that if we could see anything most immediately, we'd want a guaranteed job at a living wage, which would thereby begin to address questions of inequality and also economic security and economic empowerment. Second, the right to a voice in the workplace through a union and collective bargaining. That's a democratic enhancement, which would have a tremendous impact on American life. If we think back to the most progressive years in American history, from the 30s through the 60s, it was the years in which not only was there a dynamic civil rights movement, but even in some fashion, more importantly, at the beginning, there was a very dynamic and expansive labor movement. We need labor to be a countervailing power to the power of the oligarchy, the autocracy. The right to comprehensive quality health care. We know, whether it's called Medicare for all or universal health care, Americans have wanted this, as I said before, since 1944. There's nothing radical in that call. 4. Alan, did you want to say something along the way? I saw.
No, except I think you should probably read through quickly because we'll run out of time.
The right to
keep going. Don't worry. I'm the moderator. I'll cut you guys off.
The right to a complete cost-free public education and access to broadband internet. And we are seriously considering how to build in a right to childcare for the students who have kids, to put it that way. Okay. the right to decent, safe, affordable housing, the right to a clean environment and a healthy planet. We're also going to be working on that a bit more. The right to a meaningful endowment of resources at birth, and possibly free childcare will build into this, and to a secure retirement. The right to sound banking and financial services. The right to an equitable and economically fair justice system. Finally, the right to recreation and participation in civic and democratic life. So during these last couple of weeks since we last saw you, Nomiki, we've been trying to enhance this Bill of Rights in favor of enhancing its appeal.
Absolutely. And Alan, how are people processing this? Is it people are signing up, but how is it being received on the campaign trail when folks are going out there and running?
Well, to be honest with you, Nomiki, one of the things that was very quirky about this is Harvey and I wrote the article. We even held it back a few days thinking that maybe Putin wouldn't invade Ukraine. He did invade Ukraine. And of course, our capacity to have this be as foregrounded as we'd like it to be has been somewhat usurped by everyone's focus being on the geopolitical crisis. But everybody we talked to is just really thrilled about it. Just the other day on the Wisconsin State House floor, a version was introduced there. Harvey's in touch with a few other already elected officials around the country. And then with the congressional candidates, they're all very into it. And again, we'll be in the coming weeks trying to even build up more momentum for it and to look to candidates to foreground this. Now, the candidates we've been working most closely, and this goes a little bit to some of the early questions in this interview. I myself, in working with Harvey, obviously two white guys, I wouldn't be comfortable if we didn't have we really are working in close alliance with two people in particular, Senator Vincent Fort, who's challenging the conservative Democrat David Scott in Georgia's 13th district, and Senator Nina Turner. Nina has, in fact, really embraced this and is really charging forward with it in her race against Shontel Brown. And I also, by the way, want to point out a candidate I haven't spoken to directly about this, but Erica Smith in North Carolina's 1st district. If you go to her webpage, and she is running in a largely rural and significantly Black district in North Carolina, a very poor district. And on her webpage, the quote that is up front is, "We will come together from small towns and farms across our district to win this seat and deliver a new deal for rural North Carolinians." So it's very important that, given the history of the New Deal and the response of the New Deal by many African Americans, that we work in coordination in tandem with leading African American politicians and candidates across the country and lifting this up. And we're also, of course, building upon the work of the academics William Darity and Derek Hamilton, two great Black economists. And the response, again, across the country has been universally positive. And there's a strong recognition with everyone we speak to of the necessity of lifting up the claim made to the general public that if you want a better economic social contract, the progressive Democrats, understood broadly, not just our organization, but, the progressives who are running in this sort of Sanders lineage are the group of people to support if you want a better deal as we go forward, as we emerge out of this pandemic. And don't forget, this has been the largest social disruption any of us have had in our lifetimes within the domestic United States, an opportunity to really redraw and reset our social contract like we probably haven't seen before. We should seize this opportunity. And this is a template that people are embracing to set the table for doing
that. Professor Harvey Kaye, final thoughts? We got about 2 minutes.
Well, final thoughts are these, okay? There are two dimensions.
I'm sorry, breaking news. I'm so sorry to say this. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright just died, was just announced. I'm so sorry to say this in the middle of this. Just have to get that information out there for we can just process it. Something like that, we have to kind of interject.
Yeah, I'll also tell you that the Supreme Court of the United States this morning has basically decided that the redistricting plan that had finally been accepted in the state of Wisconsin, the governor's plan, is now thrown out. Okay, so the congressional seats will be sustained, but the legislative seats will now have to be addressed once again. That's another breaking thing. I can tell you that is not good. Okay, every time these kinds of things happen, the Republicans, given the strength they have in the legislature, it's tough. So on that note, I will say, if we want to take back America, it is absolutely essential that the Democrats once again become the party of the Economic Bill of Rights.
Absolutely. I thank you guys so much. I'm sorry for breaking in the middle. It's just we're wrapping the show pretty quickly today with a hard out, so I had to get it in before the end, and otherwise people won't tune into the show because there's breaking news. Well, the department officially stating that Putin is a war criminal. That's beyond Joe Biden's statement. That is an official statement from the State Department now. So
join with George W. Bush and Dick Cheney in that game. So there we go.
Of course, of course. But here we are today. So, all right, Alan Minsky, Professor Harvey Kaye, so grateful to you. Thank you for joining us for Solidarity Wednesday. This crazy show we've had today. It's been a little bit of a whirlwind. Lots of stuff happening. So very grateful to you as always. And we have the link for the Economic Bill of Rights up on the page, so people can go check it out and support your work. And we'll have you back on soon to see where this is going in this insane campaign season that we're in, where people still don't know what their lines are.
Right. Everybody out there, tell your friends about the Nomiki Konst show. This kind of discourse is what needs to be spread around this country into every household. Tell your friends, families, and coworkers.
I did not pay you to say that, Alan.
No, but I come out of a media background, and this is the level of we want a vibrant democracy in this country. We need this kind of show.
If you haven't already, make sure to join us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. Our patrons are what keep this show alive and well. It's how we can do it on the road when I'm filming other stuff. It is patrons who keep us going.